Hey guys, so since Halloween is coming up and I've done a lot of Halloween-y spooky videos this month, I thought I would show you all of my horror related books. Before I start, I just want to say I do not have any vampire books here because I will be doing a separate video on all of my vampire books. So that's why there's no vampire books here, because that will be a separate video of its own, so please stay tuned for that. But this video is going to be all of my horror related books. So the first book we have is Horns by Joe Hill, which I've spoken a lot about. This is one of my all-time favourite books. Pause the video if you'd like to read that, if you can. That's the blurb. But there's a guy called Ig Perish and his girlfriend Merrin is killed in a brutal way, and everybody thinks that Ig did it. So the whole story is Ig trying to find out who killed Merrin, and he wakes up one morning with some horns on his head, and these horns make people tell Ig their deepest, darkest desires, secrets, that kind of thing. Horns was also made into a film starring Juno Temple and Daniel Radcliffe, and I highly recommend, if you haven't, please read the book and please watch the film. Oh, also as a side note, Joe Hill is the son of Stephen King, the famous horror writer. And speaking of Stephen King, the next book I have is Misery. Now this is actually the only Stephen King book that I own. It's not the only Stephen King book that I read, because I used to get Stephen King books out of the library, and this again is an amazing book, but it's quite a hard read. It is a hard read, and pause the video if you want to read the back. But the basic gist of this story is there's a famous writer, something happens to him. I try and say these without spoiling anything, and his biggest fan kidnaps him and shit goes down. Basically is the gist. Misery was also adapted into a movie with Kathy Bates, which I haven't watched. I have not watched the movie, which is shocking because I am a huge Kathy Bates fan. The next horror book I have you might not consider a horror, and that is Red Riding Hood. So this was the adaptation from a few years ago, and I've heard a lot of people say that they thought it was scary and they thought it was a horror, so I've included it. Now I'm going to tell you a little secret here. I've never read this book and I've not watched the movie yet, so I genuinely don't know if it's scary or not. Next up, there's quite a few here that I haven't read yet, by the way, so I can't really tell you much about them. Next up is The Forest of Hands and Teeth, which I recently bought by Carrie Ryan. There's the synopsis if you want to pause and read that, if you can see it. I can't tell you anything about this book because I haven't read it yet. The next one I have here is The Woman in Black, which is not the Daniel Radcliffe movie, The Woman in Black, by Kerry Wilkinson. So, again, I bought this by accident because I thought it was the novel of the film The Woman in Black with Daniel Radcliffe. It isn't. So this book was bought completely by accident. However, when I looked at the back and read the synopsis, I thought, actually, that sounds really, really interesting. I haven't yet read it, but it says someone has left a severed hand in the centre of Manchester, and the only clue Detective Sergeant Jessica Daniel has to go on is CCTV footage of a woman in a long black robe placing it carefully on the ground. So it sounds really interesting, but I haven't read it yet. The next one we have here is Black Magic Sanction by Kim Harrison. Again, I've not read it. The only reason I picked this up is because there's a quote by Charlene Harris, who wrote the Sookie Stackhouse novels, on the front. And I thought if she likes it, I'm going to like it. And the synopsis here is, it is actually about vampires, so it's snuck into this video. Rachel Morgan has fought and hunted vampires, werewolves, banshees, demons and other supernatural dangers as both witch and bounty hunter, and lived to tell the tale, but she's never faced off against her own kind until now. So that sounds pretty interesting. Again, I've not had time to read all of these, but they are all on my list. I have a shelf on my bookshelf that is just for to-be-read books, and I'm slowly going through them. The next one we have is Gothic, 10 Original Dark Tales by Joan Aiken, M.T. Anderson, Neil Gaiman, Caitlin R. Kiernan, Gregory Maguire, Garth Nix, Celia Rees, Janny Lee Simner, Vivian van Velde, Barry Yorgrau, and edited by Deborah Noyes. I've probably said some of those completely wrong. I have heard of a few of those authors though. Again, it's 10 short stories and I've not read any of them, but the blurb looks amazing, to be honest. The next horror book I have is White Bones by Graham Masterton. And again, I haven't read it, but I will do, and read the synopsis if you like. But it's about skeletons and bones being arranged in a specific way, that kind of thing. The next one is Lessons from a Dead Girl by Jo Knowles. Again, I haven't read it, but it sounds really, really interesting. Pause that if you want to read about that. It is a YA novel, a young adult novel, whereas I think quite a few of these are probably adult. And the final book is actually a illustrated movie companion, a visual companion, and that's The Cabin in the Woods, which I personally do not like it being called a horror. I don't think it's a horror, but it's classified as a horror on Netflix, so there you are. But I do not think it's a horror at all. It should not be categorised as a horror. It's actually sort of a satire movie, a parody of a horror. And I think people who don't like the movie just don't understand what it's supposed to be about, because it's not supposed to be a horror. Anyway, this was written by Drew Goddard. The film was written by Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon I know best, of course, for Buffy, so I had to watch Cabin in the Woods, and I fell in love with it. And this is the visual companion for that. So that's all the horror books that I own. The next video will be all of the vampire books I own, and there's a lot, so we'll see how we get on with that. But thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what your favourite horror book is, and if you don't own or read any horror books, what is your favourite horror movie? So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye bye.